group hug. Oh, I love you guys.
I trust Jim Marr's credibility beyond reproach. If he says that I'm going to listen to it, he generally doesn't present things unless he can document them and make it factual for everyone here. So please get your hands together and welcome my friend and fellow Texan, Jim Marrs.
Howdy. I know it's California. Howdy! All right, let's get going here, get fired up. Let me get this little thing working here. This is not only my little pointer, but it's a timer. It'll start buzzing when my time's up, so y'all don't have to worry. I'm not gonna keep you overly. Just if I can make the thing work. Show's over, sorry. It doesn't work, so that's close enough. All right. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all tonight. And I was told that we not only want to know what's wrong, but we want to know what we can do about it. So I prepared a little thing here. But first, we do need to go back to 9/11 because I call it beyond 9/11. Because, and I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'm sorry. You know, some of you people probably know more than I do about this, and I'm going to go through the 9/11 stuff pretty quick. But it's so important. It's so important. I mean, everything that's going on, war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, okay? Our curtailed liberties, everything that's going on is based on 9/11, right? So if we don't know what happened in 9/11, if we can't get our fellow citizens awakened from the zombie-like stupor and away from American Idol, IDLE, and figuring out what's going on, we're going to be in really, really deep doo-doo, as they say. So let's take a quick look. Most of this you already know, so I'll try to go quick, but do you realize NORAD successfully scrambled interceptors within 15 minutes of alert 120 times in the year 2000, and they did this 67 times between September 2000 and June 2001. Y'all remember, I think it was in 1999 when the Gulf of Payne Stewart, they had an oxygen malfunction and a Learjet and went off course. Within about 12 minutes, they had interceptors all around that plane, and they tracked it all day, and they were prepared to shoot it down if it looked like it was going to run out of gas over some populated area. Fortunately, it didn't. And yet, on September the 11th, on that morning, they failed to accomplish the same practice task 4 times within the space of a few hours. Now, come on, folks. I mean, incompetence is one thing. But this goes beyond the beyond. And now let's talk about Abu Zabida, okay? He was caught in Pakistan in mid-2002, and I think this is a real smoking gun because they waterboarded him, and he was tough. He was holding out. He wouldn't tell anything. So they pulled a trick on him. They got some Arab American Special Forces guys, and they dressed them up and disguised them as Saudi interrogators. And they got old Abu, they put him up on a plane, they flew him around for a while. They told him they were taking him to Saudi Arabia for interrogation. The idea being that he would think, oh my God, now I'm in the hands of the Saudis, and they don't have any Constitution, Bill of Rights. They don't, they don't pay any attention to any kind of morality. They're going to pull my fingernails out. They're going to do all this terrible stuff to me. And he'd get frightened and tell what he knew. When these guys came in, he was relieved. Well, thank goodness you guys are here. And so they tricked him. And he revealed that he was actually working for these 3 Saudi princes. Oops, stubby finger. And that they were operating through this Air Marshal Mir of Pakistan. Oops, the highest ranking Al-Qaeda chief that they had caught, and he was actually operating on behalf of the Saudis. Need I remind you who the closest business and social friends of the Saudi royals are? The Bush family. All right? So this is really incredible. Now this was revealed by Gerald Posner, no less, in a book, and Posner himself, out of his own mouth, has told me that he has been promised the full cooperation of the CIA, so he has very, very good contacts within the CIA, and he kind of blew this story and out into the public, although it never hit the major mainstream media. You probably haven't heard about it. And within 2 months, the 3 princes and Air Marshal Mir were dead. Now, doesn't that tell you that it's probably true? And then I might remind you the Joint Committee of Congress, House and the Senate on the 9/11 investigation. There were 18 pages having to do with the Saudi connection that are still classified. Oops, now wait a minute. So now we got the Saudis who are connected to the Bushes, who seem to be the ones who's running Al-Qaeda. If you read my book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, you'll understand where Al-Qaeda came from anyway. It came from the old Mujahideen that we supported against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And before that, it was known as the Muslim Brotherhood, and it was a Nazi organization. Any of you older guys might recall in World War II over in North Africa, we had about as much trouble with the Arabs as we did with the Nazis, because the Nazis and the Arabs were pretty much allies. Stuff you don't know, stuff that can hurt you. Now we turn to 9/11 and we find, look, this is one of the clearest pictures of Ground Zero before they began the recovery and reconstruction activities. Where's all the concrete? Where's all the concrete? The government themselves said that these 210-story buildings should have produced 4.5 million tons of debris that would have stacked up to about 10 stories high. Instead, the government itself reports they hauled away 1.5 million tons of debris, and it was only about 2 stories high. What happened to the other 3 million tons of debris? What happened to the concrete? Okay, all right, what happened to it? And then, of course, we see that although the buildings were demolished in the foreground, I think it's building 6 in the background, one end of it, they're okay. But then there in the background, we see building 7, the infamous building 7. And of course, building 7 just dropped. Okay, just fell down. Excuse me. Now, of course, we also know that Larry Silverstein said, well, I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me they're not sure they're going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, well, we've had such a terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made a decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. Well, you know, anybody knows industry jargon knows that means let's demolish the building. And later, though, Silverstein over and over said, no, I had no intention of demolishing the building. And then a few years later, when this took more hold and more traction with the public, a spokesman for Silverstein Properties came out and said, well, what he meant by pulling was to pull the firemen out of the building. Well, that's absolutely insane, because the firemen were pulled out of the building at 10 o'clock that morning. It didn't fall down until 5:25 that afternoon. And now we've got Jeffrey Shapiro of Fox News, who wrote a piece blasting 9/11 truthers. He said the 9/11 truth movement is nothing but a paranoid, delusional pack of lies. And yet, right in his own article, he says, well, I was there. I heard, and I clearly remember everything. And shortly before the building collapsed, several NYPD officers and Con Edison workers told me that Larry Silverstein was on the phone with his insurance company to see if they would authorize the controlled demolition of the building. And lo, Larry the liar So he was talking about demolishing the building. And of course, Shapiro's getting this second, third hand from NYPD and Con Ed. I don't think he was asking if they would authorize it. I'm thinking he's saying, hey, you guys are going to pay off if we blow the building down? That's what he was checking on. So his statements that he never considered demolishing the building is obviously untrue. And here we see a good aerial view of Building 7, clearly nestled between the Verizon building and the U.S. Post Office. And notice they're not significantly damaged. The thing dropped into its own little footprint. And furthermore, look at this. Look how the walls all fall inward. This is classic evidence of a building implosion, where they rig it so it all falls towards the center. That's the smoking gun. This is the one we really need to concentrate on. Here's a picture of the Windsor Hotel, Madrid, Spain. It burned out of control for 2 days. Notice it didn't fall down. No steel reinforced building in the history of the world has ever fallen down due to fire. And the one I love, here's Jane Stanley reporting on the collapse of the Solomon Brothers building, and there it is in the background. They reported on this almost 30 minutes before it collapsed. Little flaws in the plan, little flaws in the plan. How'd they know it was going to fall down? And this was obviously a controlled demolition, and I know enough about controlled demolitions because as a news reporter, I had to cover about maybe half dozen building demolitions. And being a print reporter, I had to write a story. I didn't have the luxury of just TV or a photographer just taking a picture of it and saying, wow, look at the building fall down. I had to go and interview all of the explosivist experts. And they, over and over, convinced me that you don't just blow a building down. You have to have certain types of explosives, certain strengths of explosives. You have to place them at just the most strategic points. You have to trigger them in just the proper order. And to do this takes weeks, sometimes months of preparation. So the idea that they primed that building and blew it down within the space of 5 or 6 hours is just, incomprehensible. It didn't happen. So that means that building was pre-wired for demolition. And if Building 7 was pre-wired for demolition, then why is it such a stretch to believe that the World Trade Centers might have been done the same way? Now, let's look at Building 6 real quick. And first, it's got this gigantic hole in the top of it, and under that, which I don't have a clear picture of, was a 50-foot deep crater. What caused that? And you might remember that they were talking on national news about the smoke rising up from the base of the World Trade Centers before they collapsed. Was this Building 6? See the little red box over here? Notice the corner of Building 6 because here is a really telling photograph. And here we have the collapse of the South Tower. It's going down, and behind it is the North Tower, which is still standing and blocking the damage from the South Tower. And here's Building 6, and it's already blackened and the wind is blasted out. So what damaged Building 6? Okay? And of course you know about the beams flying out and the telltale signs of explosions on the World Trade Center. You know about the molten steel. It was covered, 6 weeks later. Jet airplane fuel, as you guys know, is basically kerosene, a few chemicals added, and there's no way it can attain the heat necessary to keep steel molten for days, much less weeks. And in fact, if you'll recall, the South Tower, it was clipped, and all of that jet fuel exploded out in the air, which caused that giant fireball. That's why, by the way, this, I'll admit, is my conjecture, but it's informed conjecture. This is why building the South Tower, which was burning at less time than the North Tower, collapsed first, because it was clipped. All that jet fuel burned off in the air, and the fire building in the South Tower was about to go out. So how are they going to explain the building coming down if the fire was out? So somebody said, quick, trigger that building, because, so we can still argue that there was a fire and it caused the building to go down. I really think that's what happened. But by the way, there's other things. Not only this the lack of debris, the lack of concrete, but look at these cars and these police cars, and some of these as far away as the FDR freeway. What burned them? Why are they scorched on one side and not on the other? And how's a building falling down caused this scorching? Look at this picture. How's a building falling down? Flip a car upside down. There was something going on other than a fire and a building collapsing. This was a picture that was published in Joel Meyerowitz's book, Aftermath. He was right there taking pictures all in and around the Ground Zero. And he said, this is the caption for this photograph. I put 3 of them there because he said there was at least 8 of them. I often wondered as I walked along Barclay Street what it was that did this to the parking meters. There were at least 8 of them, all leaning over the sidewalk at a 30-degree angle, their bodies charred and their plastic faces melted away. So what caused that? By the way, I hadn't meant to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you this. I interviewed a lady in Dallas who contacted me, and she was having some problems with the official version of 9/11. So I met with her. She was with the Red Cross, and they sent her up there to work with Ground Zero people and to work with survivors to support them and comfort them. And she said the thing that kept sticking in her mind was the number of these people who said as they were fleeing from the World Trade Center, they looked back and they saw people engulfed in a fireball and disintegrating. Now, how's a building falling down cause that? Now, excuse me, Kevin, I know nobody wants to talk about nukes or mini nukes or particle beams or whatever, but there was something going on there other than fire and a building falling down. Also, I would simply ask you this. This is from frames from field. These are the steel columns, and you notice they don't fall over, they just disintegrate and blow away. Now, what causes that? Notice the similarity between the pyroplasmic cloud on the South Tower and the pyroplasmic cloud of a small nuclear explosion in the desert. Does that look similar? And of course, you all know about Willie Rodriguez and others who talked about huge explosions in the basements of those buildings. Now, I would simply say this. If you wanted to pull the cover over, the wool over the public's eyes, it would be real easy if you had technology that the public did not really know about, and you were to use that in a false flag operation, and then put out whatever cover story you wanted to, and no one could effectively refute you, because we don't know about these technologies. I happen to know that they now can make mini nukes the size of a baseball. And if you make something like that, and if you were to situate it into a shaped charge so that you could channel and focus the blast effects, that could explain how they could take out the 47 steel girders and the pressure wave and the ball of fire that could eliminate the concrete. But what's really kind of sad is that at the heart of 9/11, everything else aside, of course we know that there was a confluence of agendas that were satisfied here. It gave an excuse for the New American Century, the neocons. By the way, when you hear neocon, be sure to understand, read my book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich. Neocon is simply a new, dandied up word for National Socialist, okay? But at the heart of 9/11, tragically enough, it may have been an insurance scam. Because let's go back and look at it. Number one, it was built on Rockefeller land. Early on, they called the two towers the David and the Nelson. And a lot of people in New York hated them right from the beginning because they said it broke up their beautiful skyline. And that was 30 years ago. After 30 years, the materials in the World Trade Center buildings were deteriorating. It was causing a problem. It was owned by the Port Authority. Port Authority very quietly did a study to see if it would be feasible to renovate those two towers. And when you stop and consider they'd have to put scaffolding up 110 stories in the air, it is not economically feasible to renovate those buildings. So then they decided, and they actually at one point went to the city to see if they could get a permit to tear them down. And then, oops, they found out that they contained asbestos. Oops, can't tear them down. Uh-oh. And they never were really full, so they never really earned that much money. In fact, even at the time of 9/11, there were whole floors that were empty. So I ask you, what does the mafia do when they have a building and they can't sell it and they can't tear it down and they can't renovate it? They burn it down for the insurance, okay? So, but this is a big deal, okay? This is not just the mafia in some cheap building in Chicago or something. This is the World Trade Centers. So they have to set up an elaborate deal. They go to Silverstone Properties and Wakefield Properties, who took out a 99-year lease on the building from the Port Authority, and either in the form of a down payment or as a few months payments, they actually paid out of pocket about $125 million on this $3.2 billion 99-year lease. But now they've got the lease. So the first thing Silverstein does is secure the services of an Israeli-based company, Securicom, okay? The CEO of Securicom was Wirt Walker III, as in George Herbert Walker Bush, okay? The family connected by blood to the Bush family, and also on the board of directors of Securicom was Marvin Bush, the younger brother of George W. So now the Bush family have control of the security of the World Trade Center. Next thing Larry Silverstein does is go and get an insurance policy on the World Trade Centers with the expressed position that they will pay out on the event of a terrorist attack. Now, I've gotten some conflicting advice on trying to insure your place against terrorism, but you go see how much luck you have trying to insure your business or your home against a terrorist attack. All right? Particularly on the North Tower, which had already suffered a bomb damage from a terrorist in 1993. But they got it. And by the way, they didn't get this insurance through State Farm or Liberty Mutual. No. This was Swiss Re, another Swiss company, and the giant, formerly Nazi insurance company, Allianz, which is the largest insurance operation in the world. The Alliance, of course, was the one during World War II that insured the Nazis against the inmates of the concentration camp in case they damaged the property, trying to escape or something, you know. So now they got control, and now they've got the insurance, and on the morning of September the 11th, the planes hit, the buildings went down, and Silverstein then goes to court and says, well, there were 2 planes and 2 buildings. That's double indemnity. I want $14 billion. And they were going, oh, wait a minute. So they argued in court for about a year. And so they finally settled for $4.6 billion. Now, for you math whizzes, investment type people, how would you like to invest $125 million and about a year later recoup $4.6 billion? Not a bad investment, okay? Not a bad deal, and everybody made money. The insurance pays off, and I'm sure the insurance was insured. And now you see at the level of Alliance and Swiss Re, we're talking at the level of the Bilderbergers. This is why you haven't found out the truth, and you will probably never find out the truth about 9/11. Oh, and by the way, Larry Silverstein doesn't get to keep all the money, okay? You have to share it with the mortgage holder. The largest mortgage holder of the World Trade Center was Blackstone Group, who's is headed by, I'm sure by some sheer coincidence, Peter G. Peterson, chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay? So now you understand at what level 9/11 happened and why we will probably never know the full truth of it. Now quickly, let's look at the Pentagon, okay? Something obviously happened at the Pentagon. But this is interesting. Notice how the walls at the Pentagon are blown outward. They're not pushed inward. And of course, I'm sure you all have studied. You know about April Gallup, who I interviewed, and she and her small boy crawled through the hole in the Pentagon, and you know about the hole. But how many of y'all have actually seen the hole? Here's one of the only pictures I know taken of the hole in the west side of the Pentagon prior to the collapse of the wall. And you'll notice that it's only 1 story high, so it's only about 10, 12 foot high, and it's only about 18 to 20 foot wide. And you notice the glass is still in this window right here. You got some fires going here. These windows seem to be okay. All right, and this car, this car is burning on one side, but the paint in the little white car is still white on this side. Now, I defy anybody to give me a rational explanation of how a Boeing 757 with a 125-foot wingspan and a 40-foot high tail, which is 4 stories high, gets in that little bitty hole. And if it had, then, and you can see the jet engines would have struck the building and probably would have knocked off, because wings on aircraft, weight is everything on aircraft, and the wings are basically just, tinfoil. And yet, this is what an airplane crash looks like, and I know because I covered many of them. And usually the tail section's intact, because it breaks off real easily. The wings and the giant engines, they're usually pretty much intact. But then you look at the Pentagon, here again before the wall collapses, where's the airplane? It's not there, nothing. Wheel assemblies, jet engines, nothing. All you see is this fire truck over here, which has suffered some fire damage. And you got this, looks like almost a trash barrel, one of those trash bins, and it's got a little fire going in it. But it's blowing a lot of smoke to kind of obscure whatever's happening back there. And the fire department got there because that was something I don't think they counted on. One of the local fire departments was having some exercise that morning, or they'd been to a small fire or something. And they were already geared up and ready, and they got the call, and they were right there. In fact, some of these pictures, like this picture right here, I think was taken by one of the firemen. So they're right there. Look at the nice green lawn. And this was finally the wall collapsed, partially collapsed, okay? And so they get there, and they kept putting out this fire in this trash bin, but it didn't come back again and keep blowing a lot of smoke. It's almost like somebody was just setting off a smoke bomb in there. But now, check this out. After the wall collapsed, and they had such a terrible fire that it completely immolated the entire aircraft and all the engines and the wheel assemblies and the tires and everything else, and burned up all the bodies. Although a few weeks later, the FBI said, we've identified all the victims by their fingerprints. Fingerprints. And you see when the wall collapsed, though, here's a computer model. Here's a wooden desk. The one I love is right here. It's not that easy to see blown up like this, but this is a wooden stand with a large book laying open on it, probably a dictionary or something. And the walls are all white. Where's that big fire? What happened to that big fire that just melted everything? Folks, 9/11 is so in your face, it makes the Kennedy assassination look like a true mystery. And then we go to the United States Central Command, and I saw a letter that was sent to the editor of a Kansas newspaper, and it intrigued me, so I got hold of the letter writer, and it was Sergeant Lauro Chavez, who was a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Army, a computer technician, and so good that he had actually been in the private home of General Tommy Franks working on his computers for him. And he said that for the first time in his career, on the morning of 9/11, that there was tight security and tight classification of the military exercise they were doing. The first time he had ever experienced a secret military exercise. And he said prior to 9/11, Dick Cheney had taken charge of NORAD, and this is true, I've seen the documents, and changed it from local commanders have the ability to make their own decisions about what to do to, you must contact the Secretary of Defense and get his permission to do anything. And of course, Rumsfeld was just strangely absent that morning. Nobody could quite figure out where he was. So Lauro Chavez confirmed that they were doing military exercises, including one exercise that was a scenario of a commercial plane being hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. And he said that in Central Command, all of a sudden there was a huge buzz going on. They kicked on CNN and they showed the burning North Tower, just like we all saw. And they were just, their jaws were dropping. They said, how is it possible that what we've been diagramming here as a military exercise actually happens in real life? And of course, they were all still standing there gaping, looking at the pictures when the second plane came in and struck the South Tower. He said in these war games, they had false images called inputs that were placed on the FAA radar screens, 22 or 23 or 24 of them, signifying hijacked aircraft. And you might recall that when Richard Clark contacted General Myers of NORAD and said, have you got any interceptors in the air? The first thing Myers said was, well, is this the exercise or is this real life? But you might also remember that for almost a year after 9/11, when me and others tried to talk about the war game exercises, oh, that's just an internet rumor. And nobody acknowledged that for more than a year. And yet, after a year, Richard Clark published his book, and within 4 pages was talking about the military exercises. And actually, there were several. There was Northern Vigilant, Vigilant Guardian, Vigilant Warrior, Tripod 2. Tripod 2 is a disaster exercise scheduled for New York City, which is why the FEMA emergency response team arrived in New York City the evening before the attacks. How convenient. Now, these are facts, people. These are facts, and the general public do not know this. Another thing we know is that they said that the day before the attacks, the NSA had intercepted a message from Mohammed Atta that said the match is about to end tomorrow, 0 hour. Now they said, oh, well, yeah, but we didn't get around to transcribing that and translating that until the day after 9/11. Sorry about that. But think about this for a minute. The match is about to begin. He didn't say the jihad. He didn't say the operation. He didn't say the attack. He said the match, the war games. They're starting tomorrow. That's 0 hour. Now, these are classified war games that were denied for a year that we weren't even supposed to know about, that Lauro Chavez said were top secret. How do the hijackers know that these war game exercises are going to take place, and how do they know to synchronize this attack? Only one way, an inside source. And that, again, places 9/11 as an inside job. Then we get the 9/11 Commission, I call it the 9/11 Omission Report, because there's more than 115 significant omissions, including how do they explain Building 7? They don't. They don't even mention it. How's that for an investigation? But to put the whole thing in perspective, Bush, the day after Pearl Harbor, they formed a congressional committee to find out what happened. Less than a week after the Kennedy assassination, Lyndon Johnson appoints the Warren Commission to find out what happened. 2 years after 9/11, they still were getting around, and Bush finally drags his feet and finally says, okay, well, we're going to form a commission. And he funds it for $3 million. And even the commission, handpicked, buddies as they were, said, we can't do this on $3 million. So they ultimately kicked it to $13 million spent to find out what happened that killed 3,000 America and was the largest terrorist attack in U.S. history. Now, to put it in perspective, in 2004, the Republican National Committee announced that they had spent $60 million on inauguration festivities for George W. Bush. Now that pretty well puts it in perspective, doesn't it? Now we know all kinds of things. We know CIA was the old Muslim Brotherhood run by the CIA. We know that Osama bin Laden was brought to this country in the 80s under the name Tim Osman, funded, sent back to form the Mujahideen group known as Al-Qaeda. And if the CIA controlled it at one point, how are we supposed to know it doesn't still control it? We all know it's been false flags operations. We know that in the summer of 2000, the Bush family was flown to Saudi Arabia as guests of the Saudi royals, and we know that Abu Zabada said that Saudi princes were actually running Al-Qaeda. And we see the insurance scam that 9/11 was. And then we see, and we also know, and this was said to be an internet rumor too, until Richard Clark admitted that yes, he approved this, and they flew the bin Laden family out of the United States during the no-fly period, when you and I couldn't fly. 9/11, of course, was an inside job, and to show you the censorship, and the reason the public doesn't know this, my book, The Terror Conspiracy, which was originally titled The War on Freedom, and by the way, that was before Nafis wrote his book under the same title, and he wrote me a nasty letter saying, you used my title, and I wrote back with the appropriate documentation showing that actually I had it first. But that's neither here nor there. I had a contract with HarperCollins to publish all this information, and most everything I just told you should have been known in early 2003. And I had a contract, but at the last minute they canceled it. And to show you that there was no problem with the book, they paid me the rest of the advance and gave me the rights to the book back. Here, take the money, go away. Sit down and shut up. All right? And it took until 2006 for me to get my book, The Terror Conspiracy, out. It's got 30 pages of source notes. If you want to find out not only what happened on 9/11, but put it into a larger context and get the overview, I would recommend you get my book, The Terror Conspiracy. So now, today, here we are, and we're saying that anybody that tries to dredge up 9/11 is just some fantasist, some conspiracy theorist, and probably unpatriotic, and yet now there's a book out called The Ground Truth by John Farmer, who was the senior counsel to the official 9/11 Commission, and he says that the 9/11 Commission staff discovered that the official version of what has occurred was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. Well, excuse me, what's so fantastic and what's so unpatriotic about trying to find out what happened to 3,000 Americans since their own senior counsel says that the story we've been given is untrue? And the two commissioners, co-commissioners, Thomas Keene and Lee Hamilton, at various forums and one time or another, both of them have questioned the conclusions of their own commission. So the next time somebody tells you, why should we be bothered about, they did the 9/11 Commission, and tell them, yeah, their own senior counsel says it's untrue. So, I want to know what's true. And then the next thing I've always heard is, well, where's the truth? Where's the proof? How can you prove any of this? Well, here's the proof. The Open Chemical Physics Journal in 2009. And I'm sure that David Ray Griffin told you all about it. Now here's their conclusions. Based on our observations, we conclude that the red layer of the red-gray chips we discovered in the World Trade Center dust is active, unreactive, thermetic material incorporated nanotechnology and is highly energetic, pyrotechnic, or explosive material. In other words, military-controlled explosives residue has been found in separate samples of the World Trade Center debris. Now, as an old newspaper man who's also served as an editor from time to time, if I'm sitting at a news desk and I get a story out of Europe that says a scientific paper, peer-reviewed, says that military-controlled explosive material has been found in the debris of the World Trade Center, I think I would go, whoa, that's a news story. But where have y'all read that in mainstream media? There's a news blackout. And just to tell you something, don't go spreading this because I don't want to get back until the book's out, and then I'm going to raise hell. But the end of next month, I've got a new book coming out called The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, and I had a section in there not talking about 9/11 specifically, but simply talking about how the corporate mainstream media censors the news. And one of the items I had in there was how that they have not covered this scientific paper. Another item I had in there was how the 9/11 Senior Council has said that their conclusions are untrue. Another thing I had in there was Project Censored, and listed all the stories that have been censored from the news. No editorial, just citing the facts, and it was censored out of my book. They threatened not to publish the book if I didn't pull that out of there. So it's still going on, folks. And this is why that your friends and or neighbors do not know the truth of what's going on. And what we've done now is we've taken the neoconservatism, read National Socialism, of the Bushes. And if you'll read my book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, you'll find out all of the documentation and all the background on why I can say unequivocally that the Bush administration were National Socialists. And in the German language, that's Nationalsozialistische, which the acronym of which is Nazi. Okay? And I'm not claiming that they're neo-Nazis, because old man Bush, the grandfather, Prescott Bush, was actually prosecuted in 1942 by the U.S. government for being nothing but a financial frontman for Hitler and the Third Reich. These are not neo-Nazis, these are the real old boys. These are the real thing. Okay, and this is why the true Republican, conservative, constitutional conservatives were so snookered by the Bush National Socialists or neocons, because they said all the right things. Less government control, lower taxes, no foreign entanglements, blah, blah, blah. Less socialism. And yet they did the exact opposite. Because National Socialist Nazis adhere to the old Illuminati motto, which is the end justifies the means. So they will tell you anything. They will tell you they are anything. They will pledge to do anything. They will promise anything. But they're going to do what they're going to do because they have an agenda. And they begin to get caught at it. And as you recall, there was a huge backlash in 2008. Okay? Except it was a backlash. We just got whipsawed from one pillar to another post, because we got transferred from the National Socialism of the Bush administration to the Marxist socialism of the Obama administration. Now, Obama, well, he's going to change everything. What's he changed? He hasn't changed a damn thing, okay? In fact, he has out-Bushed Bush in many areas, all right? And I know I'm taking my life in my hands, because here I am at the heart of California leftist socialism out here, liberalism, okay? And it's okay. That's okay, There's some of the liberal ideas that I can perfectly see are very valid, all right? And instead of being divided and conquered, we need to start looking for our common ground. But let me explain to you how they were able to go from National Socialism to Marxist socialism, and we can't seem to catch on, because they keep us divided and conquered. It's liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. Yeah. Heterosexual versus homosexual, man versus woman, young versus old, anything to keep us fighting with each other. Franklin Roosevelt, who I don't have a huge regard for some of his social programs, but nevertheless, when we were genuinely threatened with Nazi imperialism and Japanese imperialism, what did he say? Did he say terrorism alert orange today? They might be on the West Coast here next week. No, he told the whole nation, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And let's get together and get this job done. The Flanagans and the Shapiros and the Johnsons, and we're all Americans. Let's get it done. And folks, we've got to get back to that mentality. Now, What do we do about it? Number one, we got to figure out who's behind it. Here's how they do it. Let's go back to George Herbert Walker Bush administration. Everyone with the exception of Dan Quayle, who couldn't even spell potato, and his old buddy Jim Baker and Health and Human Services Secretary Louis Sullivan were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. That rich, good old boy, Eastern establishment, Wall Street bunch that has run and dictated to the government of this country since before World War II. Oh, but that's all right then. Then we elected a Democratic administration, Bill Clinton. Every member of his cabinet, with the exception of William Perry, Defense Secretary, Council on Foreign Relations. Well, that's all right, because we had another opportunity. We swung back, got another Republican administration, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Donald Rumsfeld, Robert Gates, Elaine Chao, Christine Todd Whitman, all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And now we've got Obama. Now we got Obama. And with the exception of Hillary Clinton, who's a Bilderberger, we got, Robert Gates. He's in there again. Janet Napolitano, Bill Richardson, Susan Rice, James L. Jones, Timothy Geithner, all Council on Foreign Relations. So the puppeteers never change. It's just the hand puppets that change. And they whip us from National Socialism to Marxist Socialism. And while I mentioned his new National Security Advisor, James L. Jones, in early 2009, about this time last year, a little bit earlier, February, he goes to the Munich Security Conference, and they had just given an award to Henry Kissinger, the very man who is acknowledged as the architect of our modern foreign policy, the very thing that everyone kind of agrees has gotten us in the mess that we're into today. And General James L. Jones gets up the next day and says, "Thank you for honoring Dr. Kissinger." He says, "As the new National Security Advisor of the Obama administration, I take my daily orders from Dr. Kissinger, passed down through Brent Snowcroft. There is a command structure in the National Security Council that remains in place." Now, folks, that tells you where it's at. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, this got to be an internet joke. You know, so they're not going to just fess up and actually admit all this. You know, who voted for Henry Kissinger? Who thought that he's still in charge? So I go to digging down to find out where this come from. And I found it was verified. And I found that his exact words were transcribed and written down and published on a website. And guess which website it was? Council on Foreign Relations. Folks, these are the people you need to be looking at. Okay? This isn't a right-wing, left-wing, liberal, Republican problem. This is a moneyed, secret society elite that is trying to destroy this country. Turn us into a zombie nation. And they're doing a pretty good job. They've got us distracted with TV. We're into the matrix, okay? We're not physically hooked to the computer, but we are entranced by an electronic matrix formed by radio and TV that gives us a false impression of the world. So quickly, what do we do about it? How do we remedy a broken society? First, you audit the Federal Reserve and or you abolish it. Secondly, I took a picture of my original Social Security card. I censored out the number. I didn't want all you guys writing checks on my name. No, this was given to me. My little signature is so funny. That's the way I wrote it when I was about 15 years old. Notice it says, "Not for identification." When did that become your computer number, and when did you get to vote for it? All right? The other thing is that Congress is on the federal employees' retirement system, and they've made themselves a nice cushy little deal there, okay? They get to retire at their top salary for the rest of their life, except for increases as the cost of living goes up. Now, if you people, some of you people are about my age or older, and you're probably getting concerned about Social Security and Medicaid, you know how to straighten that up? Make Congress on it. Put them on it. Make them you're subject to Medicare and to Social Security, and see how fast they clean it up. A law that says everybody, member of Congress, has to be under the same laws and regulations as everyone else in the country. That'd take care of that. And it all started with the National Security Act of 1947. General Jones, Kissinger's still running the show. They slipped this one through on us. We know it created the Air Force, or separated it from the Army. We know they renamed the War Department the Defense Department. We know they created the CIA. But what generally gets forgotten about is it created the National Security Council. Well, can anyone name me who the National Security Council is? I didn't think so. And yet, if you think about it, whether it was the invasion of Grenada, the invasion of Panama, the first Gulf War, Vietnam, the Iraq, Afghanistan, this is all approved okay and run by the National Security Council. Well, who is the National Security Council? It's 4 people. It's the President, Vice President, Secretaries of State, Defense. Oops, wait a minute. The President selects the Vice President, the Secretaries of Defense and State, which means the National Security Act of 1947 is where we handed over all power to the executive branch. This has got to be changed. Along with that, we need to rescind all executive orders that permit a sitting president to classify the libraries and documents of his predecessors. Bush W. did this to hide the transgressions of his father's administration. Now, Obama comes in, change you can believe in, and he does the same thing to hide the Bush administration. Now, doesn't that tell you they're all in cahoots? Here's one for you. There ought to be a law that says no U.S. intelligence agent, whether civilian or military, should be allowed to run or serve as president, since such work exposes them to a world of lies, deceit, misdirection, and leaves them open to blackmail from former associates and superiors. No spooks in office. Pretty simple thing. Pretty simple. Lobbyists. Corporations should be limited to only 1 lobbyist per member of Congress, which sounds ridiculous, but you know there's many 15, 20 lobbyists that gang up on a congressman, and they're all slipping him money, and they're all taking him places. No wonder we get the short end of the deal. And by the way, I like this one. When a lobbyist goes to visit a congressman, a public advocate should go with him. With a video camera, that's right. And all fact-finding junkets for Congress should be closely monitored and come only from public expense funds. No lobbyists needed. We got the best judicial system money can buy. We need to set a term limit for Supreme Court justices of 12 years, and federal judges should be elected by the public and subject to only 2 terms of 5 years each. And I don't care what the arguments are, we see what happens when they're in there for life. And we see how you can pack a court with one particular political viewpoint. It needs to be changed. And then, of course, we should curtail corruption in professional politicians by limiting senators to 3 terms, representatives to no more than 6. Personally, I say they should get 2 terms, 1 in Congress and 1 in jail. Of course, I think it was Mark Twain that said members of Congress are like diapers. They need to be changed often and for the same reason. But the problem is everything I just mentioned requires a vote of Congress to be enacted into law. So what do you think? The chances of that are kind of little to none, right? But we've got an opportunity this year, folks. And I don't care where your political views lie. I don't care what your philosophies are. Here's a small window of opportunity. November comes the congressional off-year elections. Vote them all out. Every single one of them. Send them an unmistakable message that we're mad as hell and we're not going to take this anymore. And yeah, you're going to lose some good people. But you know what? That has even been brought up to Ron Paul, who I have the highest regard for. He's the only guy that tried to tell us the truth, right? Dennis Kucinich, he may be right. Hey, I'll admit, Ron Paul, Dennis Kucinich, Bernie Sanders, maybe, there's a handful, and I mean a handful, in Congress that may be okay, but that's all right. Vote them out too. Because as Ron Paul says, I wouldn't mind sitting out a term if that means it's cleaning up Congress. And what you do, now here, this is going to sound like a revolutionary thought. You vote them all out, and you get a whole new crop. Yeah, you're going to get some good ones, you're going to get some bad ones, you're going to get some unknowns, and then you watch them like a hawk. Never mind what they say, because you know you can tell a politician's lying to you if his mouth's moving. Right? So don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. And then if they do what you like and you think they're doing in the best interest of the public, then vote them back in again, okay? And if they're not, then vote them out and put somebody else back in there. Boy, that sounds real revolutionary, doesn't it? But it's not. That's the way it's supposed to work. Nobody intended for professional politicians to be in there for the rest of their life and then retire on that federal golden parachute. Make them work for a living. Vote them all out. Vote them all out and send them a message that you work for us, okay?
Who counts the votes?
That's another thing. We need to go back to paper ballots and poll watchers. And I dare say that anybody in this audience, if you're under about 40 or 50 years old, you probably don't even know what a poll watcher is. Poll watcher is a person who's designated by either a political party or an issue constituency, and they're perfectly legal and perfectly correct. They go to the polls, you cannot say anything, you cannot campaign, but you can stand there and you can watch what happens all day long, and you can report irregularities. And if we had poll watchers, if we go back to paper ballots that we could count and recount again, then we might get back to a democratic republic. Okay? Restore the Pledge of Allegiance in schools to remind both young and old the basic tenets of U.S. sovereign freedom of the republic. You know, I used to get up and everybody, I pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, okay. But you know, you say it every day, it starts sticking with you. And I think it's unconscionable that the kids today aren't being taught civics, they're not being taught what this country is all about, and they don't even have to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And while we're at it, let's go for some true educational reform, not No Child Left Behind, the most socialist program I've ever heard of, and hadn't done anything except dumb down whole generations of school children. Number one, learn English. All right? I'm sorry, I'm all for multiculturalism. I love the Spanish culture. I love Spanish food. I love Spanish. And when I go in a Mexican restaurant or where I'm somebody with there's some Hispanics, I try to hablar español, you know. Comida, cerveza frío, por favor. I try, you know, I try. Because I think that's only considerate, all right? But this is a country that was founded by English-speaking people, and the common language is English. And if you're going to drive a car, if you're going to work here, if you're going to own a business here, keep your culture. Be bilingual. But speak English.
That's a
all right?
attitude.
Let's learn an English language.
Excuse me. This was country. All right. Now we're going to start arguing. That keeps us all torn up here. This country was not stolen from Mexico. If they have a problem with how we got it, tell them to talk to Generalissimo Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. he signed it over. Okay? So they got a problem with Santa Ana, not with us. In fact, in Texas, remember the Alamo. And all right, let's remember the Alamo. Once again, and a whole contingent of Mexican citizens were with the Texans. And this is about freedom, folks. This is not about race. Okay. No. God almighty. Are you people? All right.
Yeah, you people.
If you don't want to hear me agree to disagree, what is Arizona doing except enforcing existing law? If you don't like the law, change the law, okay? And that brings us, no secret societies need apply. No one who's a member of any of the secret societies should be able to hold public office. That's another one. And we need to do away with the Patriot Act, okay? And no more cover-up commissions, okay? If something happens like 9/11, then they should create a national committee made up of people from the various states, of various philosophies, from various political parties and persuasions, to organize and to do a truthful investigation. This thing about appointing your little political buddies to, and bringing in the foxes to see who got the chickens is just insane. And while we're at it, let's have oversight committees to oversee the CDC, the Federal Communications Commission, the National Institutes of Health. Are you all aware that Dr. Julie Gibberling, who was the head of the CDC, director of CDC through the Bush administration, and when he got out of office, she left, and immediately was named the head of the vaccine division of Merck Pharmaceuticals. Now, how blatant a conflict of interest is that? Another thing that we need to do is support the 10th Amendment movement. 10th Amendment plainly states any powers not specifically delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states. Period. End of story. Or the people. Hey, that's us. Okay? Uphold the Posse Comitatus Act. Get rid of Northcom and the FEMA camps and all the mechanism that is now being set in place to install martial law. Look at the difference. We used to have police officers in blue who were there to serve and protect, and today they're in black with Nazi-style helmets, saying, get off the street, you don't have a permit to be walking down the street, okay? Y'all may or may not be aware of the billions of dollars that are confiscated each year by law enforcement on suspects. Picture this. A friend of yours borrows your car. He gets stopped. They find a marijuana cigarette in the car. They take your car because it's involved in a drug raid.
Not in California.
But if your friend goes and rents a Hertz rent-a-car and they stop him and they find a joint in there, they don't take the car from Hertz. Is that fair? No. Come on, let's start getting down to some common sense. Decriminalize marijuana, of course. Keep going, keep working at it. I'm afraid attrition will find, the old people will die and the younger people will say, yeah, okay, we need to do that. And a few more years it'll just be self-evident. But look what we do if we decriminalize marijuana. We reduce prison populations, we end all the corruption and violence, we raise a lot of money through simple taxation, ease medical problems, and reduce the demand for hard drugs. The argument I hear now is, if you legalize it, everybody will be smoking dope and it'll lead to harder drugs. That is the same argument that they use against the repeal of prohibition. Everybody's going to become an alcoholic, and alcohol will become a huge problem, and folks, it didn't happen. And marijuana is not going to happen either. People can go get a joint, they'll be happy and stay home, watch TV, and go have any fun. Do you also understand that right now it is illegal to grow hemp in the United States? We import our hemp hemp that our forefathers raised that has been a staple crop throughout history. Decriminalize industrial hemp. That's just insane, but that's going on too. Simple little solutions, folks. Rescind and eliminate all so-called hate crimes. You cannot legislate hate. Somebody hates, it's terrible, but you can't tell them you can't do that. All it does is lead to abuse and misuse. All right? What you do is you have public consciousness raising, okay? Now you can legislate. If somebody hits somebody, prosecute them. Kill somebody, prosecute them. They drag somebody behind a pickup truck, prosecute them. But you don't set up laws saying, well, he said something and I think that offends me. Well, you know, if you're going to go that far, let's go to the extreme. The hate crimes laws, they offend me. So I'm offended, so let's don't do it. America is the leading arms merchant of the world. If we want to curtail the violence in the world, we need to curtail our exportation of arms. And that includes small arms, that includes aircraft, that includes missiles, and we need pharmaceutical reform. No corporate patents or discoveries from publicly funded institutions. No ban, go back to the ban on direct-to-consumer ads on radio, TV, and media. People go to the doctor and say, I want that phenomenal dextromethorphan, you know. They say, well, why? Well, because I want to run through the daisies like that woman on TV. That's insane, folks. So only one person should be determining what you need and what you should take, and that's you, and the next person is your personal physician. And past that, forget it. Physicians should be provided full information on all drugs instead of being, you know, taken on junkets and wheedled and slipped money and given gifts and said, hey, you really need to put people on this Prozac, you know, it's really great stuff, makes them feel good. By the way, speaking of Prozac, are you all aware that Prozac is 94% fluoride? Now just think about that a minute. I'm running out of time, I'll make this quick. Think about this a minute. If you want to take Prozac and get zoned out and just go through the day going, everything's okay today. You got to go to your doctor and you got to get a prescription. But yet, if you live in one of the cities that's in 2/3 of this country, you got non-medical people dumping fluoride in your water supply. Gee, wonder why we're so dumbed down. Wonder why we're so complacent. Got to do something about that too. It's the militarists, of course, demand the FDA study homeopathic treatments rather than just banning them because they are, again, back to Julie debriefing, whatever her name was. Yeah. You know, who's head of CDC and says, no, you can't have that, and then goes to work for Merck. You know, why don't they test some of this stuff and find out what really works? Some of it really does work. And of course, it all comes back to the eugenics program. The people in control are really not even making any secret that they think the real problem is us. It's overpopulation. They would like to see the world's population cut by 2/3. Well, wait a minute, how are you going to do that? Well, vaccines, testing, GMO foods, fluoridation, chemtrails, okay? You all do know about the 100+ dead microbiologists, right? Yeah. The very people who might could tell us that all this vaccine hubbub is a phony and a hoax, and might be able to tell us what we could take to avoid it. No, they're dead, they're wiped out. That's in my new book. In fact, at first they said, well, how do we know this? So I listed them, every one of them, and the cause of death. It ran to 22 pages. And then they said, oh, well, that's too much space. Got to cut that out. Okay, so I cut it out. But I left the website in there, so go find for yourself. They're knocking people off who can tell us how to solve the problems, all right? And of course, the Obama healthcare plan, I'm not even going to get into this. Everything you've heard is true, and even worse. You're going to have death panels. You've got bureaucrats that are going to decide, well, she's over 60, and it's not real sure that we can cure this situation, so we're just not going to treat her. You're also going to find that his civilian corps that he talked about, civilian security force, you might recall that. He talked about he wanted to raise the civilian security force that to the same level of training and armed and funding as the U.S. military. Sounds suspiciously like the SS to me, okay? And everybody said, oh, wait a minute, you can't do that. Folks, it's in the healthcare thing, along with an officer corps, okay? It's in subpart 12. Read it for yourself. But the key thing is that under the healthcare plan, you're going to buy it whether you want it or not, because it's a national plan, and if you don't buy it, then the money will be deducted from your savings or from your IRS refunds or from your bank account. And since we know they've already taken over General Motors, I see no different than they're saying you're going to buy a Chevrolet. And you say, but I don't want a Chevrolet. I want to ride a bicycle. Well, you're going to pay for it anyway, because the IRS will take the price of the Chevrolet out of your savings, out of your bank account, out of your IRS refund. Folks, anything that is not voluntary is tyranny. Start thinking about it. You're going to holler and scream about this one. The birth certificate. Who cares? It's not about his birth certificate. It's not even about Obama. It's not about race. It's not about religion. It's a very simple question. Are we a nation of law, or are we a lawless nation? If we're a nation of law, then he should adhere to the Constitution, which he is sworn to protect, and he should produce his long-form birth certificate. All right? Period. End of story. And if you were a lawless nation, then, which apparently we're becoming, because whoever gets in power, whoever can says, I'm in charge here, here's the rules, that's what happens. Of course, it's not fascism if we do it. And you notice I was equal opportunity here. Here's the new book. Here's what's wrong. Here's what you can do about it. It's all in here. It'll be on the bookshelves on June the 29th. Don't say anything when you leave here. I don't want them canceling it at the last minute as they've done a couple of mine. And lastly, to lead into Ian, I want to tell you that we are in a struggle for hearts and minds. And whether you care to participate or not, you're involved. And this is the age-old struggle between light and darkness. And historically, the theologians have all pretty much admitted that that signifies light equates to knowledge, truth. Darkness equates to ignorance. So pick your side. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. And, you know, in Texas, you're kind of thought of as a liberal. And really, folks, we all in Texas don't think we hate Hispanic people. We're Tejas. We're Texicans. And, you know, we don't have that sort of hatred that, you know, you might assume that, you know, we want a border, but we don't want Hispanics out. That's what makes up our state. And in the battle for Texas independence, we had the father was Juan Navarro, and his family was destroyed and his properties seized and burned by Santa Anna. And, you know, we had a huge contingent of Hispanics in the Texas Revolution. Your history. And it wasn't a brown versus white, as they'd like to have you think. At this point, it was a tyrant. It was tyranny. The Chihuahuan state was already revolting. They wouldn't give Texas statehood. It was a military territory. It was treated as such. And he came up and tried to disarm the Texicans. And they got drunk and loaded up a cannon, a little tiny one. I mean, it's not even like a yacht starting one. And shot it at some troops, and that started it. And, you know, we have to deal with these things. Mexico has the toughest border in the world on Guatemala. They don't allow anybody to cover it, to cross back and forth. So we do have empathies for Hispanic people. We like to see them take over their own country, which has one of the largest gross national products in the world, home of the newest bunch of billionaires there are, but never has there been so much disparity between the top and the bottom. So anyway, guys, we're going to take a little bit of a break. Thanks for hanging in with us. And when we get back, we'll have Ian Crane, and he'll wow you. I hope he'll have his little earpiece on so he can roam around a little bit on stage. But thank you. We'll see you back in about 10 minutes or so, okay?